Hello dear students, and how are you and how things are going? I hope that everything is all well with you, and I hope that you are healthy and safe. Welcome again to our poetry lecture, which is number 8 for today. If you still remember, we stopped while we were talking about imagery. And I ended the 7th lecture by telling you that next time we are going to have a poem which is all based on visual imagery. And we said that we want to prove that a poet can use imagery in a very skillful way to communicate his feelings, because images carry feelings. And not only this, we are going to see how a poet is able to create a mood by using images. So, our poem for today is taken from the collection of poems written by Tennyson. The collection has the title of In Memoriam, and I think it's a good idea to stop and think a little bit about this collection. Whenever I hear the name of Tennyson and this collection in Memoriam, I feel happy that life is still full of faithfulness and love. I consolidate my feelings about close friendship and the fact that it exists. Tennyson had a very close friend. His name was Arthur Hallam. Arthur Hallam died. And Tennyson, our poet for today, was a very faithful friend who never forgot his friend, but actually he made him an important topic in all of his poems. Basically the poems that have an elegiac nature. So our poem for today can be described as an elegy. I know that this is the first time that you know what an elegy is, because we still need to go to the elegy after we finish the business that we have started with language devices. But for the time being, I'm going to tell you that an elegy is a poem written to lament the death of a person. To lament the death of a person. That is, the elegy is about death and is meant to be a sort of lamentation. The poem shows that Tennyson still remembers his friend, and it is dominated by a mood of sadness, but this mood of sadness is coupled with feelings of calm acceptance. So what does Tennyson say? Sorry. When on my bed the moonlight falls, I know that in thy place of rest, by that broad water of the west, there comes a glory on the walls. Thy marble bright and dark appears, as slowly steals a silver flame, along the letters of thy name, and over the number of thy years. The mystic glory swims away. From off my bed the moonlight dies, and the closing eaves of wearied eyes. I sleep till dusk is dipped in grey. And then I know the mist is drawn, a lucid veil from coast to coast, and in the dark church like a ghost, thy tablet glimmers in the dawn. Actually, this poem proves that the poet has what we might call an ever-present awareness of his dead friend and his feeling of identity with him. And in order to express this feeling of identity with his friend, he employed visual imagery which is predominantly pictorial. This imagery succeeded in creating an over mood of sadness, but at the same time acceptance of death. Now, let me tell you something. If we go to line number 1, we notice that the poet is speaking about the time when he is sleeping, or at least he is in bed. Finally, he was able to find something to unite him with his friend. What is the thing that unites him with his friend? It is moonlight. Moonlight becomes an ever-present image in the poem. Notice how much he loves his friend and how eager he is to find this kind of identification with his friend. So, thy place of rest, you know what I mean by thy place of rest? It means the grave of his friend. The thing that unites the poet with his friend is that both are exposed to moonlight. So finally, he found something to share with Arthur Hallam. The way he used to share memories, beautiful things, and also studying. They used to study together. So after all these years, and I believe that 17 years elapsed, and Tennyson was still writing poems dedicated to Arthur. So finally he found something that he can share with his friend, and this is moonlight. Moonlight falls on the bed of the poet, and it also falls on the friend's resting place, which is his grave. But listen to this. There comes a glory on the walls. A glory on the walls. Now, what falls on the bed of the speaker in the poem is moonlight. But what falls on the resting place of Arthur Hallam is a glory. It is something really interesting. The speaker in the poem controlled moonlight, subdued moonlight, and made moonlight serve the purposes that the speaker wants to achieve. So glory here is moonlight. And remember, glory is a word with religious connotations, religious implications and suggestions. When Christians pray, they always mention glory for God in heaven. So here is the time when we can prove that images carry feelings. Because, you know, moonlight is nothing but moonlight. What else could it be? It's just moonlight. But here, the poet made moonlight glory, which shows that images carry feelings. Because he has positive feelings towards his friend, glory falls on the grave, but not moonlight. Moonlight is turned into glory, which is a sign of love and blessings by God. So he is indirectly saying that my friend was blessed by God, and probably he was forgiven by God. And that's why what falls on the grave is glory rather than moonlight. So these are the first 4 lines, and we notice that the poet uses falls, and it rhymes with walls. Rest rhymes with west. So the first stanza rhymes as A, B, B, A. And don't forget that it consists of 4 lines, so it is a quatrain. Now this comprehensive image of moonlight is pursued in the second quatrain. The poet says, thy marble bright in dark appears, as slowly steals a silver flame, along the letters of thy name, and over the number of thy years. Thy marble bright in dark appears. You know, marble is a good example of synecdoche here. Okay, let me explain that. The grave is made of stone, cement, and marble. And the writer did not mention grave in line 5, but he mentioned marble. So marble is just part of a whole. So he mentioned the part and he means the whole. The part is marble and the whole is the grave. So thy marble means your grave, bright in dark appears. Now, don't you notice that bright and dark are an oxymoron? Bright in dark, usually bright and dark do not appear together. So the grave appears bright in dark. Well, is moonlight biased to a certain geographical area? Is it possible that moonlight shines in one place and doesn't shine in the other? Well, you know that the answer is no. But since the poet loves his friend, he sees that God blessed his friend with moonlight, and in order to prove that, he used a figure of speech. So what does he say here? As slowly steals a silver flame, the marble became like a thief, because we have steals. The marble or the grave becomes like a thief along the letters of thy name. So the poet here says that the marble, which is the grave, is the thing that steals a silver flame. He doesn't mention the word thief, but he mentions something closely associated with the thief, and that is steals. So the writer did not mention the vehicle, but mentioned something closely associated with the vehicle. So the poet here is personifying the marble grave as a thief, and the thief is a human being. So the figure of speech here is an implied metaphor, and a special form of the implied metaphor here is personification. So wherever you have a personification example, definitely you have a metaphor, but not the opposite. Not every metaphor is a personification. So the poet personifies the grave as a thief. And what did this thief steal? Did he steal money? Did he steal jewelry? No. He stole a silver flame. And silver is the color that we usually associate with the moon. We associate gold with the sun and silver with the moon. So the grave of the poet's friend stole a silver flame. This silver flame enabled the poet to see obviously without this being mentioned in the poem, but obviously this enabled him to see the tombstone of his friend. And the tombstone is the piece of stone that we attach to the grave so that we could write the name and the date of birth and death of the dead person. So this silver light that was stolen enabled the poet or the speaker in the poem to see the name and the letters of the name, and also the number of the years, because moonlight was subdued to the purposes of the speaker in the poem, who is supposedly Tennyson himself, speaking of Arthur Hallam, his friend. If we move to stanza 3 and continue this splendid image of moonlight in the poem, the poet continues and pursues his beautiful image by saying, the mystic glory swims away. Remember, glory here is moonlight. So moonlight starts to swim away. Can you see any kind of figure of speech here? Swimming. Who usually swims? Yes, the one who swims is the human being. So he likened the glory to a human being. This is an implied metaphor because the writer mentions the vehicle, the tenor, but does not mention the vehicle, but rather mentions something closely associated with the vehicle. So swimming is associated with persons. The mystic glory swims away, like a human being who swims. Moonlight swims away. From off my bed, the moonlight dies, and the closing eaves of wearied eyes. I sleep till dusk is dipped in grey. Now, obviously, the poet suffers from something. When do we feel that our eyes are heavy? Yes, good guys. Usually we feel that our eyes are heavy if we suffer from insomnia. And insomnia is sleeplessness. When we are unable to sleep, we say that my eyes are heavy. So the poet here says that his eyes become like eaves. And eaves are the edges of the roof. The edges of the roof. And the edges of the roof are usually heavy. And then I sleep till dusk is dipped and grey. Here the description of the dusk and this kind of mixture between black and white is really beautiful in the poem. You feel that you have this brightness and some black dots, which seem to be a very splendid scene. And then I know the mist is drawn, a lucid veil from coast to coast. And in the dark church, like a ghost, thy tablet glimmers in the dawn. Now, when the mist is drawn, the poet could see a lucid veil. Lucid is related to light. And veil is related to darkness. It's very much like speaking of the appearance of light as lucid, and veil is darkness. So it's very much like a woman who drops her veil. When she's veiled, there is this black color. But when she drops her veil, what do we have? We have lucidity. And this is a very beautiful image. The image of light as it causes darkness to vanish. And then the speaker talks about the tablet of the grave. The tablet of the grave, it glimmers in the dawn like a ghost. Now, why does he say like a ghost? And I'm sure you know that like a ghost is a simile. Dark church is the tenor, indicator of resemblance is like, and the vehicle is ghost. So the tablet of the grave is likened to a ghost. And you know, in the folklore of people, usually the ghost has a white color, and this white color would be very clear in the dawn. It will offer a kind of color contrast. So the tablet of the poet's friend, it glimmers in the dawn. So let us wrap up here and summarize what we have been talking about. Obviously, in the first stanza, the poet is linked with his friend by moonlight. Moonlight falls alike on the poet's bed and on the walls of the church containing his friend's memorial tablet. You know that one of the practices is to bury people in the church, and this is what we call the churchyard. You know, graveyard, churchyard. But as I told you before, the moonlight does more than simply falling on the walls. The poet says there comes glory on the wall because of the connotations of glory. Glory connotes splendor, brilliance, and heavenly bliss. Now here, usually when we think of a grave and when we think of death, we think of horror. And you know that death is one of the big themes in horror films. We are often horrified. But this kind of blessedness that we have seen here, and this is the thing that the poet endowed his friend with, actually made us feel a sort of friendly thing, also describing the grave as, he described the grave as a resting place, and he spoke of moonlight as glory. Now, the idea of glory was not mentioned in stanza 1 and then it was discarded. Actually, it was reinforced in the second stanza as the marble tablet becomes bright in the darkness. So if you think of darkness and the tablet is covered with moonlight, so it stands out. It stands out from what? From its surroundings. As if it were illuminated by celestial light, heavenly light. It's God who endowed his friend's grave with this kind of celestial light. And we notice that poetry is the fusion of sound and sense. Be careful. It's a very important thing we have to remember all the time. Poetry is where sound and sense become one thing. The part serves the whole and the whole serves the part. Together they make a harmonious whole. So we notice that in order to pursue this beautiful visual image, the poet brought the oxymoron to the help of the image in stanza 2, and he indicates the intensity of his awareness of his dead friend by using the oxymoron. The visual image also that we have in the description of the tablet is sharpened in the next 3 lines of stanza 2. The light of the moon is described metaphorically, and it becomes a silver flame. And this is an extremely effective combination of words, creating an intensity similar to that of the fire. And also it adds to our feelings that the poet made the moon take the side of his friend, so to speak. He subdued the moon. Now here the 2 words silver flame plus silver flame plus talking about glory together, they showed the subdued quality of the moon, and they create a very successful visual image. And this visual image served the purpose of the poet. The poet wanted to show the intensity of his feelings towards his friend, a friend who was forever separated from him because of death and the passing of time. And then this silver flame, as I said, steals and moves slowly, noiselessly along the letters carved on the tablet. And this enabled the poet to spell out the friend's name and the years of his life. Now, every time the poet adds another stanza, the visual image becomes clear and precise, and with it comes a keen realization of the poet's feelings. The feelings of the poet get clearer and clearer as we read more lines of poetry. So the image was already established as we reach stanza number 3. The visual image changes. The glory now becomes mystic glory. And mysticism is related to some sort of religious feelings, and mystic glory relates to this kind of heavenly bliss. And this thing disappears slowly, noiselessly, and steadily it swims away, and this is metaphorical. And from the bed too, the moonlight dies and the poet sleeps, but not until he closed his eyelids, which became as heavy as Eve's, and this is again metaphorical. He likened the eyes, which are heavy because of the lack of sleep, to the lower edges of a roof, overhanging the walls of a certain building. And this is a sense of weight that the poet wanted to communicate, like his eyes are so heavy. And this kind of heaviness is undurable, because when you think of the eyelids, they cannot really bear this kind of heaviness. this made us, I think, feel very aware of the heaviness of the eyes. So the poet sleeps till dawn, as he says here in the poem. So lest the mood of the poem be destroyed by the wrong image of rosy dawn, which could be, you know, a kind of contradiction. If he said rosy dawn, this could have contradicted speaking of the images of light and darkness. So he didn't say a rosy dawn or something like that, but he said that dusk is dipped in gray. So daybreak is seen as night. Daybreak is similar to night, but it is tinged with gray, and thus the central image of moonlight is continued. It is modified, but it is not less dominant. And the central image remains dominant from the first stanza to the last stanza. I think Tennyson in this poem was a maestro of visual images. So the land from coast to coast is covered by mist, and mist here becomes a lucid veil, shrouding and yet shining, as moonlight shines and shrouds. In the dark church, thy tablet like a ghost with its lucid veil glimmers through the night and into the dawn. Then the tablet, the tangible representation of the dead friend, stands out in the darkness as exactly as the memory of the dead friend lives in the deep heart's core of the poet. So we notice here that the poet used all these images, which are very powerful and strong, in order to make a kind of parallel with his heartfelt feelings for his friend. Now, could have the total meaning of the poem existed without having employed these powerful types of images? Personally, I don't think so. But I will be waiting to hear from you about that. You know, how do you see these images, and how do you think they are related to the theme? So, to speak of such imagery then is to say that images can be functional, and they can achieve valuable purposes, and they are far from being an ornamentation in the poem. It's not a mere decoration, I mean. So this is an example of a poem which is all based on an image. Now, I want to quote another example, and I will take you to page 81. After having discussed Tennyson, I will discuss a short stanza, a quatrain, taken from the rhyme of the ancient mariner. It's going to be a combination of visual, auditory, and kinesthetic images. I think this is not the first time you get acquainted with the rhyme of the ancient mariner, the literary ballad by Coleridge. And you know, this kind of poem has what we call the ballad stanza. And the ballad stanza, as you probably remember from our study of stanzaic forms, consists of 4 lines. Line 1 and line 3 use iambic tetrameter. Line 2 and 4 use iambic trimeter. That is, line 1 and line 3 are longer than line 2 and 1 by 1 foot. And the rhyme scheme is always fixed: A, B, C, B. A, B, C, B. That is, line 1 and line 3 are different in rhyme. Line 2 and line 4 are the same. The poet says, "The fair breeze blew, the white foam flew, the furrow followed free. We were the first that ever burst into that silent sea. The reason why I chose this stanza is not only to show you the symphony of auditory, visual, and kinesthetic images, but also to prove that poetry is the fusion of sound and sense. I want you to notice how the poet employed sound devices to serve the continuous movement of the boat that is described in the poem. In this stanza, we have a description of the rapid continuous movement of a boat and how this boat pulls its way, and it was the first boat that burst into the sea, as the poet says. We notice that the poet used basically alliteration, assonance, consonance, and rhyme in order to communicate the message. That is, the poet combined between sound and sense. If we look at line number 1, it's really musical. The fair breeze blew, the white foam flew. Notice how musical the line is. We have fair, foam, flew. The use of the voiceless fricative F in the first line, fair, foam, flew, and the use of the B in the first line also, B in breeze and the blue. And we reach to the peak of the employment of the alliteration of the voiceless fricative F in the second line, when the poet continues by saying the furrow followed the free. Notice the use of this voiceless fricative, which relates really to movement. The furrow followed the free. Notice the movement of the lips. Then we notice also that the third line uses more alliteration. We were the first that ever burst. Notice the magic of internal rhyme in the poem as well. In line 1, you have a blue, and the blue rhymes with the flew. Line 3, first rhymes with burst. So in addition to alliteration, we have the use of internal rhyme. Also in line 4, into that silent sea. S, silent sea. This is about sound. But what about images? And I'll go back to that. We notice that the first line talks about breeze, which was blowing, and the white foam that was following. I think you can imagine the fair breeze blowing and how we feel it, and the foam that follows, because when the boat moves forward, it creates foam behind it, and the boat follows it freely. So we notice that in line number 1, we have visual images, and in the second line, we have visual plus kinesthetic images, images related to movement. We were the first that ever burst. Here we have a very effective auditory image of something which is very much like an explosion. It's like an explosion. The way that the boat entered the sea, since the sea was silent and this was the first boat, we noticed that it was like an explosion. And here we have the contrast between the noise of bursting and the silent sea. So here we sense the rapid, smooth, continuous movement of the boat, not only because we are told that the breeze blew and the foam flew and the furrow followed the free, but also because of the alliteration of the sound F, as I mentioned. The internal rhyme came to the help of this kind of image by using this internal rhyme between blew, flew, first, and burst. And the predominance of continuant consonants here, this all echoes the continuity of movement. So Coleridge here used burst in sharp contrast to the words that contain the letter F, and they form a beautiful symphony of alliteration. And the use here of burst is for a good thing, you know, which is onomatopoeia. We notice that burst as a sound echoes the meaning. And this helps in what? Reinforcing and strengthening the suddenness with which the ship, or let me say the boat, breaks into the silent sea. So we notice here that in order to reach a full employment of sounds, we have the metrical variation also comes to the help in order to create a very beautiful image. And the alliteration of the S in line number 4 in the last line drives home the silence of the sea to bring a sharp contrast between the noisy image in line 3 and the quiet image in line number 4. So here we come to the end of our 8th lecture, and next time I would like to quote an important example about the use of thermal imagery in the description of the cold weather. That is our lecture. Next time we'll go to page 82. After that, we are going to study another language device, which is going to be the symbol. Thank you very much for being with me today. I enjoyed the lecture and I hope you will feel the same. Thank you very much for your patience and attentiveness. See you next time and goodbye.